Hello, my name is Richard Medcalf, founder of Xquadrant. I coach some of the world's top executives and management teams, helping them achieve bigger and more meaningful results than ever before. In this season, I'm speaking with C-suite leaders from around the globe to find out what the COVID-19 pandemic has taught them and what wisdom they have to share for other leaders. Welcome to Leadership Lessons for Challenging Times. Today I'm speaking with Borcherding, CEO of Cloudreach, the world's preeminent independent cloud services provider. It's an incredible, fast-growing company, and Brooks has got an incredible amount of experience in the tech sector gathered over many, many years. In our conversation today, I think you'll find it interesting as he talks really about the three stages of his response to COVID. Big business challenge for anybody, even for fast growth, a tech company. And also how he distinguished and differentiated to serve different sorts of customers in different ways. We also get on to some fun subjects such as Pink Floyd, Queen, and Monty Python. But in amongst that, I think you'll find a wealth of really helpful leadership advice to model and to take into your own life and business. Enjoy this conversation with Brooks Borcherding. Hello there, Brooks.
Hey, Richard, how are you? Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. Hey, thanks for joining this session. Before we jump in, why don't you give us the elevator pitch? Who are you, and what's Cloudreach for those of us who don't know?
Okay, great. Thank you. So Brooks Borcherding, I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Cloudreach. We consider ourselves Cloudreach kind of the leading independent cloud services company in the world. We provide cloud professional services, managed services, and also software to help companies adapt and take advantage of the underlying cloud capabilities. We've been around since 2009, so one of the very first generation, cloud services company in the space. If you think about it, that was really the origination of the cloud about that time. So the very first AWS partner based out of the UK. And now really an interesting, time and space for us as the adoption of cloud technologies has continued to accelerate. I've been with the company since October, so I came in to basically position the company for this next stage of growth. So we're one of those mid-stage growth companies. And before this, I've been in the cloud space for about a dozen years, back to 2009 myself. I was with a company called Navisite, where we rolled out one of the first infrastructure as a service platforms in 2009, and part of that first generation with Rackspace and Terramark and Savvis, even predating AWS and Google and Azure, the hyperscale providers that basically dominated the space since then. And prior to that, at Cisco, where we overlapped, I think personally for a period of time, and a while before that with Avaya, and started my career at Accenture. So always in enterprise tech, enterprise comms.
Fantastic. Yeah, so amazing, incredible CV with all these big brands in it, and various executive roles, leadership roles, and chief revenue officer roles as part of that. So, and of course, now you're in this great position, right? Cloud is booming. You're a tech company, so as we start to think about leading in challenging times through this recent COVID, ongoing COVID experience, I guess in some ways you've probably been able to ride it quite nicely. There's probably some good trends. You're probably quite good at working remotely. But what's it been like? I mean, what's worked well for you as you've had to navigate that, and where's the challenge been?
So from our perspective, we definitely benefited from being a quote unquote born in the cloud company. So from 2009, we were architected to think cloud first. And it's really our mantra has been, driving and accelerating the adoption of the cloud. So we actually embody that ourselves. So we're in a position where we already had everyone equipped to be able to work remotely, mobile, or at a client site. So therefore, when the pandemic really started to impact businesses, we could immediately pivot to provide business continuity to all of our existing customers. So, in that regard, it was definitely a benefit for us to be able to offer that continuity of service, and we did it for 100% of our customers. So
that's an amazing thing, right? I mean, that's just to stop on that. It's amazing, right? Because the promise of cloud was always access it anywhere, resilience, geographic independence, all the rest of it, right? And it's exactly this kind of time when that suddenly becomes the impact of the power of that has become so evident.
Yeah, and then we were also, being of our scale, kind of mid-size, we were agile enough to be able to respond to each specific customer requirement. So some customers wanted to extend some period on site, others wanted to say, how do we accommodate this working remotely? But because of that agility, we could accommodate all those different scenarios. So that was positive. Of course, the headwind became, if we're dealing with people in retail, if we're dealing with people in transportation, or hospitality, many of those customers simply, closed ranks and looked to preserve cash immediately.
Yeah.
So you had that headwind. At the same time, we saw kind of tailwinds of other industries that needed to accelerate their migration to cloud, that they need to scale their businesses, that they need to figure out how to get their thousands of workers connected now remotely. That may have been a project they were considering, but it wasn't one of those pressing priorities. They came as a sacrifice to other business needs. So overnight, some of those projects just became, one of the most pressing things that they could do. And of course, we're with our services, we're able to help, the greater good. So we did, for example, the pandemic response platform for the state of Florida here in the United States. So how they're visualizing the spread and sprawl of this. How they're modeling out how their actions that they're taking are positively or negatively affecting the acceleration of infection rates. Looking at their supplies and where they might be short and how they could accommodate the needs at the local level for redistribution. So some things like that were certainly something that the team embraced to say, we never really thought of ourselves of providing work for the greater good. But suddenly we're helping save lives, really, and contribute, to these type of efforts. And so in that regard, that was something that the team has really welcomed, in as an outcome.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting what you talked about, these projects that suddenly kicked off, right? And other things which totally closed down. When I was at Cisco, actually, I had a phrase when I was building out partnerships, which was, you can run to the front of the train, but you can't go faster than the train. So sometimes in a client organization, the train is not moving. They're busy doing something else. They've got other internal things. The train ain't moving. And you can do everything you can do, clear all the barriers on your side, but you have to accept that kind of certain reality. And it sounds like what happened is suddenly a whole load of trains have suddenly decided to leave the station, and you've been ready to jump on that and be there. Another load of trains have hit the brakes, right? And actually,
exactly, So we were able to to use your analogy, change trains pretty quickly. So we were able to pivot and kind of address where we could bring the most value to organizations in this time.
So how did you, as a leader, get your mind in the right place and start to prioritize when faced with all the dials changing on the business? Did you have some kind of playbook? I mean, we were talking, before about John Chambers at Cisco. He had this quite famous playbook within Cisco for when there was a crisis, how, he would say, we need to double down on our customers, we need to use our financial strength, we need to save to invest. There were a number of things he would talk about as his kind of guiding mantras. How do you look at that situation when suddenly everything blew up in the entire business?
That's a good question. I mean, some of it was the practicality of, the most pressing needs of the business, right? So part of this, just tactically speaking, was when this took hold, just coming to grips with the needs of our 650 employees, right? So how do we immediately address their personal needs? So yes, they can work remotely, but psychologically, what's their work home environment? They all have some pressing personal issues potentially with the impact of the pandemic on them and their families and their environments. And so we went through an extensive kind of management training where it was all about crisis management for our extended management team, so down to first layer managers. And we did that very quickly to try to help them help their teams through this time, right?
Yeah.
So that was just the tactical execution was the imperative for us was making sure we care for our employees. And then we already talked about how we were able to kind of address the ongoing needs for our customers. The other is, in terms of the changing trains analogy, we were able to pivot some of our services to meet the most pressing needs of customers. So, our advisory capabilities, we were able to really bring that forward and say, helping lead through crisis and how to manage a remote workforce and thinking about the psychology of organizations and how to help them. From a technology perspective, it's enabling remote workforce, VDI, remote access, those type of things, which are just capabilities we have, but we could make those more prevalent and kind of bring them to market more aggressively so that organizations knew we could help them through this. And so everything we kind of presented was, we're here to help, and we'll try to be as responsive as possible. Now, when you step back, though, about the shift, what I think the prevailing thought right now is that we had expected, cloud adoption to continue to pan out for another 10 years, right? So it's already been 10 years, it's accelerating, but it may be only 10% of workloads have actually moved to the cloud. A lot of the core workloads haven't. So many people are kind of in hybrid states.
Yeah.
So we believe that it was going to continue to accelerate. But I believe what's happened now with the pandemic is it's going to significantly compress the time of that next phase of adoption, because it's advanced the theory of cloud first is the imperative way to think about how you build your infrastructure, right? It wasn't always the prevailing thought. I mean, I think it was accepted over time. Yes, I'll get there at some point, but I don't need to do it now. Now I think every kind of IT leader has recognized I've got to make that a business priority immediately.
Well,
so
it's like if you get called out once, okay, but if you get called out twice,
yes,
you're not going to be looked at well, right? It's like, hang on, we did this in 2020, right? Why are we doing it again? Why weren't you ready in 2023 or whatever?
So from the macro level, I kind of compare this to those technological transitions that John Chambers would have talked about taking advantage of. But similar to kind of VoIP, right? In the late 1990s, when IP telephony started to come to bear and people started to rethink their consolidated infrastructure to be around Ethernet and how they could leverage that. That was a very significant, technological shift that we were able to be a part of at Avaya. And then when I moved to Cisco, of course, the overarching digital transformation and now cloud is one of those very significant ones. And even more recently, and yet related, is software-defined networking and how the wide area network topologies have dramatically changed now to embrace the benefits of SD-WAN, which provides more efficient and effective connectivity to cloud networks and to hybrid networks. And so it's interesting to see the significance of these transitions as they take place. And the important things for us as a business leader, I think, is to be able to identify the ones that are truly transformative and be able to prepare the organization to take advantage of those inflection points early. So you need to be aggressive at trying to embrace it. Take some risk, to be an early player in that space and see if you can position yourself as one of the early leaders to really give you an opportunity to do something special, for the company and for all the employees of the company.
Got it. So what I'm hearing is really there's that immediate focus on your employees. There was the second focus on, okay, how do we respond to customers and serve them where they are right now? And then there's this long-term or longer term, okay, what does this mean in terms of catching, really accelerating this trend?
Yes.
And playing offense, right? And kind of going for it.
Yeah. So I think in that regard, we've been managing through this effectively in the first couple to few months, but I think preparing the organization for that acceleration will, I think, inevitably come as we see this acceleration take place.
Yeah. What's been the most difficult decision that you've had to make in this period?
I think the bravest decision we've made so far has been to hold our footing. And we've been able to basically tell our employees, look, we have a plan to get through this. We did not take aggressive cost-cutting measures. We did not, look at reducing staff. We actually held our ground, and even started to go to market to say we're looking to attract great talent now. So we saw this as an inflection point to potentially really strengthen ourselves as we're expecting this acceleration to come. I only say kind of brave in the fact that it was potentially against conventional wisdom, right?
Yeah.
So you have to make that choice as a CEO to go to the board and to your investors and say, look, this is a bet I want to make, and convince them that that's the right play to make. And then be prepared to potentially come out of this faster because we took it as an opportunity to strengthen ourselves.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, zig when everyone else is zagging, right? I often think the counterintuitive path it can be the right one often, right? It's
I mean, I do have the luxury of having a great a backer in Blackstone. I mean, they've been fantastic, as a supporter for Cloudreach and the path that we're on. So that is a luxury that we've had, to have such great, support from our primary investors.
Yeah, that's again, it's the ecosystem around a company, right? It's not just it's everything. It's the investors and everything. How's this forced you to grow as a leader? What's been your own journey over these few weeks, few months?
Personally, it's a lot of introspection, and kind of, you can, it's easy to kind of reach out and kind of embrace your teams, right? Externally, and care for the teams externally. I think it's very hard to think about, how am I being affected by this? Right. So that personal introspection, I think, is very challenging. And speaking personally, I understand this is a podcast, but I will answer authentically. That's the challenge. It's how do you also balance, professional, personal? How do you also balance kind of the mental fatigue and strain? How do you? And obviously, I've got the background, so I'm sitting here on the couch, where I've been resident for the last 2 months, trying to manage through this. And it's just really making sure that I'm strong, maintaining my foundation personally.
I've been hearing that a lot. Sorry to interrupt. Sorry. Yeah, I've been hearing that a lot from leaders. A lot of my clients, right? The CEOs, CFOs, CTOs, and they've had that wave of, okay, I need to sort my, take my responsibilities, make sure everyone's okay. There's that adrenaline. And then you just say it starts to become the new normal, right? It starts to become, this is how it's going to be for a while. And do I actually have my rhythm, my own personal rhythms that have been working for me and sustaining me? Have I actually redesigned those, re-engineered those for the reality of my life now, which might be locked in with the kids around or whatever it is? And if it hasn't happened, I mean, literally a client I spoke to 2 days ago, he was exactly that situation. It was, I haven't been for a run properly for months. I used to get into work early, be the first person there, have time to get in the zone for the day. Now I'm just kind of like rocking up 5 minutes before my first call, and my mind's not in the right place. I'm getting through, but I'm not on the front foot. So I think it's definitely a timely reflection for leaders.
Yeah, I do appreciate some of the things people have been sharing. Thought leadership pieces that people have been sharing. The CEO for Korn Ferry just puts out some amazing content. To be honest, I didn't know who he was at all. I just happened to be one of these kind of distributions, and suddenly you pick up his content. I'm like, that's a very thoughtful person. And I reflect on it. I actually share some of the things with my team too, to say, hey, this is a really interesting thing to reflect upon, as leaders of the organization. And it's just that kind of mental, I think, psychological, just comfort or preparedness or reflection.
And thank you as well, Brooks, for sharing just a little bit of that personal side, because I think it's a mark of a real leader to be able to be a bit vulnerable and to do that, right? Not everybody on a podcast would talk about, sometimes it can be hard, as a leader to take that, right? And I think
we'll see. I do think, Richard, playing this out longer term, what happens next is going to be really interesting, though. I mean, reflecting on this probably is a new norm for us for quite some time. I mean, we're already starting to see lasting effects through the end of the calendar year of companies saying they're going to continue to work remotely, or cancellations of events and significant technological meetings that were planned for the fall are starting to be pushed. And so you start to see these early indications that this could be a long ride. And the kind of psychological effect of that on the organization is also something I think as leaders we need to really be thoughtful about, right? Is if this does start to extend out, how do we really manage effectively as a distributed organization over a longer period of time in the face of an ongoing pandemic, right? Not just a new norm of, yes, maybe it's a better way to work, live and prosper. I'm saying more along the lines of in the face of a potential ongoing pandemic. How do you manage that?
Yeah, because it's, say, the novelty wears off, right? And for everybody, and there's the first stage where the adrenaline's going a little bit. I think, as you said, if there are waves as well of this, then that, the second time you have to go into lockdown is going to be a lot more wearing than the first time.
Yes, exactly. So it's just preparing for those different potential scenarios, looking forward and making sure that you're addressing the needs of your employees, of your organization, and future relationships with customers in that environment.
What advice would you give yourself 10 years ago? So if you looked at the Brooks of 10 years ago, with what you'd learned now, in this in your different leadership roles, what would be your advice, or the big learning?
10 years ago to now. Take advantage of the opportunity, be aggressive and bold, and cherish the moments you have, with the accomplishments and the achievements that you make. I think that's reflection in the moment of, well, what I tell my team now is we want to make Cloudreach the company where you can come in, do exceptional work, and take advantage of your capabilities to stretch yourself and really do your life's work, right? So knowing that people won't be with the company forever, but I want to give them the opportunity so when they depart in a few years, they, as they move on in their careers, that they can look back and say, that was an opportunity that I really cherished in my career. I got to push myself professionally. I got to do great work. I got to be in an environment with great people, and we achieved something of great significance. So when they reflect back, so that's really my leadership objective is create exceptional opportunities for 650 people, and hope that they get to reflect back on that as one of their great life's experiences.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, I think when you can do that, right, when you can help people thrive, almost everything else kind of takes care of itself, right? I mean, the happy people in the business is going to create a fantastic business fundamentally. As long as you don't get into the comfort zone too much and all the rest of it, right? But if you give people the chance to grow and push themselves, then generally good things come out of it.
And we try to use that to competitive advantage to attract great talent and and to nurture and develop great talent too. So that's the premise of how Cloudreach is going to be successful going forward.
Perfect. So let me ask you a few little quick fire questions about what kind of what built you up as a person and as a leader. What's your favorite book?
My favorite book. Oh, I think my favorite book of all time, this might sound a little bit hokey, but it's probably Jurassic Park, to be honest.
There we go.
And I only because this was before the movie, this was before all that, but the fact of how Thomas Crichton kind of looked at emerging technologies and wove that into a fantastical story, but it was on the cusp of what's actually possible, right? The fact that they were finding these DNA samples of dinosaurs.
Yeah.
What's the potential of this? So he took that kind of interesting thought and just like I said, wove it into an interesting story. I wasn't a big fan of how that continued in the movies, but just the book itself. I went and I read the rest of his kind of many of his different stories, like the Andromeda Strain and things like this. So, I thought it was just really interesting of, that how you could find somebody that, like a scientist, that had the ability to create that type of narrative.
Yeah, it brings science or tech to life a little bit, right? When you push it a little bit, but it's still, often those things aren't so far-fetched as we think, right? When we look back a decade or two afterwards as well. What about your favorite kind of personal productivity tip, right? What's one thing that really works for you to get stuff done?
My personal approach is more along the lines of hard work, to be honest. So I have a mantra: you kind of create your own luck, and I just think that's an effort is based on effort-based return. So I do. You had made a comment earlier about people waking up early and having that time of thought and reflection, or I still do that, but tend to put in quite a bit of time each day just for the body of work and that is in front of us. And so often it's just, working at that type of hard pace and, like I said, trying to create your own luck. So, don't leave any rock unturned, especially when you face an opportunity, like the cloud adoption. I don't want to look back in 3 years and think that we were right there to take advantage of this and we missed it.
Yeah,
right?
we missed it. Yeah, absolutely.
We did everything we could to capitalize on this.
Yeah, that's what I see often with my clients. It's like, how do we take the brakes off? Like, how do we actually clear the glue or the gunge out the system so that we can actually do what we need to do, right, at the speed we do. What about an inspiring leader? Who's somebody who, who's in your mind is somebody who's inspiring or has been an influence on you as a leader?
You mentioned John Chambers earlier. I got to work pretty closely with John in the role that I was in at Cisco here in New York. And so got to have, a bit of personal exposure with him. But John was a great leader because of the way that he embraced culture. I hadn't really seen anybody embrace culture like he had, and how he leveraged that to competitive advantage for the company. But the mantra around customer first, that was completely embodied by him. Like, his ethos was do whatever you need to do to satisfy the customer, and he empowered everybody in the company to be able to make a call, and they could bring whatever resources they need to bring to bear to make sure they were doing the right thing for a customer. And everybody knew that because he reinforced it, right? So, it was just really interesting, though, to see how they reinforced and built that culture around this customer centricity, which is really something I learned in that regard. I have to admit to being a big Steve Jobs fan ever since I was young, right? So I grew up in the PC, revolution, and I watched every one of Steve Jobs, presentations, every one of them. So I just thought he was fascinating to be able to marry the technology to the industry, and the way he could articulate, the show that he presented was completely it was like he was speaking to me individually. That's exactly what I thought. And I will say I had a recent opportunity to work with Austin McCord here at Datto. And that's where I was a chief revenue officer recently. Austin was fascinating because he kind of was similar to Steve Jobs in that regard, but he started Datto in college when he was 21, and I joined him as he was the CEO when he was probably 27. And he had a workforce of 800 people. They were all kind of millennial, right, in that age group. But the way he led a millennial workforce as a millennial was amazing, right? And so they get to see the different way of communicating, a different way of, of creating communities, the different way of how you're motivating that type younger workforce, and be firsthand there as an older now, more seasoned person, was a real learning experience. And then to see him succeed, by selling his company, created for over $1 billion, and being able to, by the time he's 30, just be one of those kind of real successful young entrepreneurs and moving on to something else, was a really interesting experience as well.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's exciting to be around those kind of people always. What about your favorite quote or motto?
So it's interesting. Speaking of Datto, so we would have our quotes on the back of our business cards. It was one of the kind of quirky things there. And I chose a quote from Nelson Mandela, which was, "It always seems impossible until it's done." And I was just thinking about that recently, considering the pandemic, right? But how applicable that quote is in the time we're in right now, to come from Nelson Mandela, but a global pandemic of who knows, how large and impactful this will be as this plays out. But being in the center of that and going through that, and sometimes feeling that overwhelming fear of impossibility, and yet knowing that we're going to get through it. And when we reflect back, we may not know exactly how we're going to do it today, but we know we're going to get through it. And so when it's done, we'll have thought we kind of conquered the impossible. So.
It's impossible is really interesting. I mean, I actually quite often love setting impossible goals with my clients, not so they have a 17-step plan to get there, because it's impossible, right, by definition, but it's like, who would you need to be the kind of person that would achieve that goal, and to bring that right into the present. That's a really incredibly powerful approach. So I have a little, a model called the $1 Million Coach. It's like, well, if clients pay me $1 million a year, well, how would I be showing up, right? How would I be spending my days? How would I get up? What would I do in the morning? How do I show up? It's a really nice way of bringing something new out of you, I think, as a person.
Yeah, it's true. Different perspective, different thought process.
So my final mini question is, I have it on good authority that you're one of the world's greatest gurus on 1980s pop music. So who's your favorite 80s band?
Not pop music. It's 1980s rock music.
Rock, even better.
Because that's the nuance of this. Is there was some really crap music from the 1980s, but
okay. So who's your favorite rock band from the 80s?
I have to say, this is probably even to the 70s, 80s. I still think Pink Floyd's amazing, and I can still sit down and listen to Animals or The Wall or any number of their albums, Dark Side of the Moon, from end to end, and find it to be a very kind of cathartic experience. So I just think they're the mastery of an intimacy of that, and intricity, in the word I'm trying to say is of that music is. It really is amazing of how they were able to stitch that all together, and the quality of them as individual musicians, but as a band, it to me is pretty stunning, really, when I think about it. But then you have all the classics, you'll have like the Rushes of the world and things like that. Great, just some epic type of rock music. And it's funny, my 17-year-old son now has a 1980s playlist, and he goes back, and so if we go out driving together, he'll put on his 80s playlist, and he tells me, he goes, "Dad, these are great. These are some great songs." He goes, "But none of my friends know them. So every time I play them, it's like the first time they're hearing this." And it's like, some of this stuff is great. So,
well, two of my one of my greatest achievements actually has been to kind of grow my own band. I'm a guitarist. I love all that stuff, rock music. And so I've now got my kids both play different instruments, so we can be a bit of a band. And I'm a big Queen fan. And when that Queen film came out, my daughter came back from school saying, Dad, I'm really annoyed. Everyone's a Queen fan now. But they don't understand, like, they don't really know it all like I do, because they've like been exposed forcibly to their entire back catalogue. So
you'll like this little way of me to leave it. But my daughter now, my 12-year-old daughter, she could, if you ask her, she has her top 5 Pink Floyd songs. She has her top 5 Beatles songs. And so it's super. In fact, the other day she went online and she ordered herself a Dark Side of the Moon t-shirt, and she didn't even tell me. And she comes down for lunch, or I see her after her virtual school, and she's wearing this Pink Floyd t-shirt. I'm like, where'd you get that? She goes, I ordered it. I was like, good for you.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a very proud moment, right, when you managed to persuade your kids to like the same kind of music.
Yeah.
Hey, it's been great to speak. So just tell me, where can people find more out about you or about Cloudreach? If they want to upgrade their cloud game, where do they go?
Yeah, it's pretty easy. You just go to our website and you'll find your way. Right, we're trying to tell our story through the web, and they can reach me at brooks@cloudreach.com. So a pretty simple way to reach me directly. I have a mantra internally for my employees that says no Slack goes unresponded to. So we kind of embraced transparency, radical transparency in that regard. But I do that the same for people to reach out to me externally as well. I think fostering the community is a great thing to do. So.
Well, hey, Brooks, that's been a fantastic conversation. Really enjoyed it, and thanks for being open, sharing lots of great stories and ideas to everybody. So once again, really appreciate it, and thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks, Rich.
Cheers. Take care. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Now let's turn to you. If you're a top performer who's already accomplished great things and yet knows that there's a whole new level of impact and potential open to you, then why don't we get on the phone and strategize on how to get you there? Head over to xquadrant.com/speak to find out more. Until next time, be bold and be purposeful.